Okay, so get ready because today we're diving deep into Squid Game.
Ooh,
But not just like the surface level stuff you see on screen.
right.
We're going behind the curtain to explore the connections between this fictional world
Yeah.
and some pretty disturbing realities.
What's really striking to me about Squid Game is how it blurs those lines
Yeah,
between fantasy and reality.
totally.
We've got these articles that reveal all these fascinating details about the production,
Mm-hmm.
but also like this podcast that raises some thought-provoking questions about the show's core themes.
Yeah, like how much of this horrifying scenario is actually rooted in the real world.
Exactly.
So let's start with something that kind of blew my mind.
Okay.
The creator, Hwang Dong-hyuk,
Right.
apparently only had 6 months
Oh, wow.
to write both seasons 2 and D3.
No way.
He even said,
Oh,
with Squid Game seasons 2 and 3, I was only given about 6 months' time,
wow.
given the fact that we had a date that we wanted to launch the series.
Yeah.
So counting backwards, it meant that I had to be done with the writing aspect of it by then.
6 months for 2 seasons of a show this intricate.
I know.
That's like almost unheard of
It's crazy.
in television.
Totally.
And I'm wondering if that time crunch had any impact on the story itself.
Yeah.
Like, did it affect the pacing or the character development or the overall depth?
That's a great question, especially considering that he wrote the entire thing himself.
Really?
No team of writers.
Wow.
Just him.
So interesting.
It makes you wonder how that creative pressure influenced what we see on screen.
Right.
Speaking of interesting details, one article points out that the frontman,
Uh-huh.
the masked villain,
Right.
is always shown using his left hand.
And that's no accident.
Oh,
The actor who plays him, Lee Byung-hun,
okay.
is actually right-handed.
What?
He had to train himself to perform almost everything with his non-dominant hand.
That's so interesting because, like, dominant hand use is rarely, like, a factor in casting.
Right.
So it makes you wonder, was this, like, a deliberate choice by the director?
It definitely adds a layer of intrigue to the character.
Right.
Throughout history, left-handedness has often been associated with negative traits.
Yeah.
Think about the words sinister or gauche.
Oh, yeah.
So this subtle detail might be a way of reinforcing the frontman's villainy,
Uh-huh.
playing on those subconscious associations.
That's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
Almost like a visual shorthand for bad guy.
It
It makes you think about all the little choices that go into building a character.
Right.
Even something as simple as which hand they use.
Exactly. And those choices often reflect deeper themes and ideas.
Yeah.
And this attention to detail extends to the set design as well.
Okay.
One article highlights how some of the games relied heavily on CGI,
Uh-huh.
but the Mingle set, that massive labyrinth,
Right.
was built entirely practically.
That's wild. Can you imagine navigating that maze in real life?
Oh my gosh.
With the pressure of the game
Oh.
on you?
That physical reality
Mm,
must have added a whole other level of intensity for the actors.
right.
And it contrasts sharply with the more stylized CGI-heavy visuals of some of the other games.
Totally.
It makes me think about the different ways the creator uses those visual elements
Mm-hmm.
to create a specific mood or atmosphere.
Absolutely. Speaking of the impact on the actors, several of them have talked about how being on those sets,
Yeah.
especially during games like Red Light, Green Light,
Right.
evoked a sense of genuine fear and unease.
This raises the question of whether that fear we see on screen
Mhm.
is purely acting or if it's something deeper.
Yeah.
Method acting, where actors immerse themselves deeply in their roles,
Right.
is a known technique, but this seems to go beyond that.
Uh-huh.
It makes you wonder about the psychological impact of participating in something like this, even knowing it's not real.
Right. Is it the set design, the costumes, the overall atmosphere that triggers those feelings, or is it something more primal like our innate fear of violence and death?
It's definitely thought-provoking.
Yeah.
Is this blurring of lines between performance and genuine emotion enhancing the viewer's experience?
Right.
Or is there an ethical question here about the actors being subjected to such intense psychological pressure,
Yeah.
even in a controlled environment?
I hadn't considered that.
Yeah.
It makes you think about the responsibility of a creator when dealing with such sensitive themes.
Right.
Speaking of creators,
Yeah.
remember Thanos,
Yes.
the villainous rapper from season 2?
Yes. Played by T.O.P., who was actually a member of the incredibly popular K-pop group Big Bang.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It's almost like art imitating life in a way.
Right.
Do you think his experience in the music industry, especially the pressures and expectations that come with K-pop stardom might have influenced his portrayal of Thanos.
It's definitely possible.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder if viewers familiar with his music career
Right.
would see him differently on screen. Like, are there subconscious connections we make between his real-life persona and his villainous character?
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
But here's the twist that really got me.
Okay.
While we haven't seen actual death games playing out in the real world,
Right?
the podcast we're looking at connects Squid Game to South Korea's financial crisis in the 1990s.
That's a really important connection.
Yeah.
Because it grounds the show's themes of desperation and inequality in a historical reality.
Yeah.
The podcast describes how underground gambling and loan sharks thrived during that crisis,
Right. Yeah.
exploiting people who are already struggling to survive.
So even though we don't have those literal games,
Right.
we have real-life examples of people being pushed to their limits,
Yeah.
making impossible choices just to stay afloat.
Totally.
It adds a whole new layer to the show's message.
It does. And it reminds us that the show's commentary on the dangers of greed
Right.
and the consequences of economic disparity isn't just theoretical.
Yeah.
It's deeply rooted in real-world experiences.
Exactly. And that brings us to a powerful observation from the podcast host.
Okay?
The way the show twists innocent childhood games into these deadly competitions.
That's such a brilliant and disturbing concept.
I know.
It adds a whole other level to the horror of the situation.
Totally.
It's like taking something pure and joyful, something associated with childhood innocence,
Right.
and corrupting it
Yeah.
into a symbol of violence and survival.
It's chilling, right? And it speaks to the idea that even the most familiar things can be twisted and distorted when people are driven to desperation.
Right.
The show seems to be saying that under the right circumstances, any of us could be capable of those horrific choices.
It's a bleak outlook, but one worth considering.
Totally.
It challenges us to think about the systems that create those conditions of desperation
Yeah.
and how we as individuals and as a society can work to dismantle them.
Absolutely. But before we get too deep down that rabbit hole, let's pause here.
Okay, we've got a lot more to uncover, including that central question. Is Squid Game just entertainment or a stark warning about the direction our world is headed?
Oh, good question.
Stay with us.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of Squid Game. Before we paused, we were discussing how the show takes those familiar childhood games and turns them into something truly terrifying.
It's like it's tapping into our collective nostalgia, but then twisting it into this nightmare scenario.
Right.
And it makes you wonder, is the show just trying to shock us?
Yeah.
Or is there like a deeper message here?
That's where the podcast we've been discussing comes in.
Okay.
It makes this compelling argument that Squid Game is more than just entertainment. It's a warning about the very real dangers of unchecked greed and economic inequality.
And it draws a direct connection between the fictional games and South Korea's financial crisis in the 1990s.
Right.
A time, as we talked about earlier, when people were desperate enough to turn to underground gambling and loan sharks,
Yeah.
often with devastating consequences. Right. And while those activities weren't literally life or death games, they certainly had a profound impact on people's lives,
Right.
pushing them to the brink of financial ruin, and in some cases leading to suicide.
So even though those exact games didn't exist, the underlying desperation and the willingness to risk everything for a chance at a better life, that's all too real.
Exactly. And what's even more chilling is that these themes resonate far beyond South Korea.
Oh, yeah.
Think about the global wealth gap, the rising cost of living, the crushing student loan debt that many people face today.
Right.
These are all forms of modern-day desperation that make the premise of Squid Game hit a little too close to home for many viewers.
It's like the show is holding up a mirror to society, forcing us to confront these uncomfortable truths about the world we live in.
And perhaps that's where its power as a warning comes in.
Okay.
By showing us the extreme consequences of unchecked greed and desperation, it challenges us to examine our own values, our own choices.
To ask ourselves, are we complicit in creating a system where something like Squid Game could actually happen?
It's a heavy question, but an important one.
For sure.
And the podcast doesn't shy away from it.
Okay.
It argues that Squid Game is a call to action, urging us to address the systemic issues that create the conditions for exploitation and violence.
It's like the show is saying, hey, this is what happens when we allow greed and inequality to run rampant.
Right.
do we want to keep heading down this path, or are we going to do something about it?
Exactly. And that's what makes this conversation so interesting. It's not just about watching a show and being entertained.
Yeah.
It's about engaging with the ideas it presents
Uh,
and using those insights to spark real-world change.
it's about recognizing that Squid Game, while fictional, is a reflection of very real anxieties and concerns that we need to address.
Shifting gears a bit,
Okay.
the articles also delve into some fascinating technical details about the show's production. For example, one article highlights how the creator initially envisioned Squid Game as a film, not a series.
It's hard to imagine it now, right? The sprawling narrative, the intricate characters, the sheer scope of the games. It all seems perfectly suited for the episodic format.
Right.
But to try to cram all of that into a 2-hour movie, that must have been quite a challenge.
It speaks volumes about the creator's vision and his determination that he was able to adapt the story for television
Uh-huh.
and create something that's captured the attention of audiences worldwide.
And it makes you appreciate the level of detail that went into every aspect of the production,
Right.
from the set design to the casting to the meticulous execution of the games themselves.
Speaking of the games,
Yeah.
remember that scene in season 2 where Jo Yuri, playing the pregnant contestant, Kim Jun-hee, effortlessly flips the Dakshi tile in one try?
Oh, yeah. It was such a badass moment. Like, she was a total pro.
Well, it turns out that was all thanks to CGI.
Wait, really? I totally bought it.
Yeah.
I thought she was a Dakji master in real life.
Apparently, the actress struggled quite a bit with that particular skill.
Oh, wow.
In the end, they decided to use CGI to create that perfect flip.
That's amazing. I would never have guessed.
Yeah.
It just goes to show you how the magic of movie making can enhance even the simplest actions on screen.
And it reminds us that what we see on screen is often a carefully constructed reality where visual effects can be used to create illusions that would be impossible to achieve otherwise.
Speaking of skills, what about the Gongi game in season 2?
Yeah.
I was impressed by how deftly Kang Hanol playing Kang Daiho handled those little sacks.
Apparently, he spent days practicing for that scene, trying to master the art of Gongi.
Wow.
But even with all that effort, they ended up using a professional player for the close-up shots.
Oh, wow. Imagine putting in all that work only to be replaced by a pro for the crucial moments.
Right.
But I guess it makes sense they wanted to make the game look as authentic as possible.
Exactly. And it highlights another fascinating aspect of filmmaking, the collaboration between actors and specialists who bring a particular skill set to the table.
It's like this hidden world within a hidden world.
Right.
We see the actors competing in these intense games, but behind the scenes, there's a whole other level of expertise and artistry at work.
And in the case of Squid Game, that collaboration has resulted in a truly groundbreaking piece of work that's resonated with audiences worldwide.
Right, and we haven't even touched on the impact the show has had on popular culture, the memes, the Halloween costumes, the real-life Squid Game events that have popped up around the world.
It's become a phenomenon that transcends language and borders, sparking countless conversations about wealth, inequality, social justice, and the ethics of entertainment itself.
Which begs the question, why has Squid Game resonated so deeply with audiences worldwide? Is it simply the novelty of the games, the thrill of the competition, or is there something deeper at play here?
I think it's a combination of factors. The show taps into our primal fears, our fascination with the macabre, our desire to see underdogs triumph against all odds.
Right.
But it also offers a scathing critique of modern society,
Yeah.
exposing the cracks in the system and forcing us to confront the consequences of our collective actions.
And it does all of this with a visual style and a narrative complexity that's both captivating and disturbing.
Absolutely. Squid Game is a masterclass in blending entertainment with social commentary, and I think that's why it sparks such a global conversation.
Well said. We'll be back with the final part of our Squid Game deep dive after a short pause. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to our final segment on Squid Game. We have explored the production, the games, and the show's chillingly realistic commentary on society.
And we've grappled with the question of whether Squid Game is just entertainment or a warning about the path we're on.
Yeah, there's one more piece of this puzzle I keep coming back to. It's something the podcast mentioned that really struck me.
You're talking about the creator's personal connection to the story?
Yes, Hwang Dong-hyuk has been very open about how his own financial struggles inspired him, while he was writing Squid Game.
It adds a whole new dimension to the show, knowing it came from a place of such personal hardship.
It makes you wonder if art created from that kind of experience hits differently.
Yeah.
Like, does it have a greater impact on the audience?
I think there's a certain rawness and authenticity when a creator pours their own lived experiences into their work,
Right.
it can resonate on a deeper level.
It's like we're not just watching a story unfold, but connecting with someone's very real struggles and emotions.
And it reminds us that these issues of economic inequality and desperation aren't just abstract
Yeah,
concepts.
right.
They have real-world consequences for real people.
Squid Game isn't just a fictional spectacle, it's a reflection of someone's lived reality.
And that makes its message all the more powerful.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with a mix of unease and a sliver of hope.
Unease because Squid Game lays bare some disturbing truths about human nature and the systems we've created.
Yeah, but hope because it's ignited a conversation, a global dialogue about these very issues.
It's a reminder that we have a choice. We can continue down a path of unchecked greed and inequality, or we can work towards a more just and equitable world.
So as you continue to process Squid Game, I urge you to ask yourself,
What role do I play in this system?
and what can I do to create a world where games like Squid Game remain firmly in the realm of fiction?
That's the real challenge facing us, and it's a challenge we must all face together